Today's Russian papers focus on the death of Roman Starovoit, sacked yesterday by President Putin from the post of transport minister and later found dead in a park outside Moscow, reportedly with a gunshot wound to the head. An apparent suicide, say investigators. Moskovsky Komsomolets writes, the suicide of the former transport minister and former governor of Kursk region, Roman Starovoit, just hours after the presidential decree sacking him, is an almost unique event in Russian history. Offhand, I can only think of Soviet Interior Minister Boris Pugo, who chose to die instead of being arrested after the failed August coup of 91. Like other papers today, Moskovsky Komsomolets suggests that yesterday's dramatic events were connected to what has been happening in Kursk region. There, an unprecedented corruption case has been building, linked to fraud schemes that made it possible for the Ukrainian armed forces to break into this border area last summer without difficulty. That invasion took place 2 months after Starovoit had left the post of governor and moved to Moscow. The defensive fortifications built in Kursk region turned out to be insufficient to repel the charge. In April, Starovoit's successor as governor, Alexei Smirnov, was detained in relation to a 1 billion ruble fraud case. Starovoit's former deputy, Alexei Dedov, was also arrested and accused of fraud and appropriating state funds during construction of supporting structures for border guards. Kommersant writes that according to preliminary data, Starovoit's death may be connected less to his sacking and more to the police investigation into bribes and theft during construction of the defensive fortifications bordering Ukraine. Mr. Starovoit could have become one of the main defendants in this case. Construction work on the fortifications began 3 years ago. The federal budget provided more than 19 billion rubles for this, and the Regional Corporation of Development decided how to spend that. In autumn 2022, Mr. Starovoit reported that 2 lines of defence had been completed and that his region was ready to repel any incursion. However, after he left the post of governor, the Ukrainian armed forces were able to breach the border and occupy part of Sudzhansky district. During checks, it emerged that the construction work on the fortifications had not been completed before the Ukrainian incursion. The government paper Rossiyskaya Gazeta covers the story in a very different way. Nothing about it on the front page, well, except for this reference to Andrei Nikitin, appointed Russia's acting transport minister. A big article on page 2, there is Andrei Nikitin being offered the job by Vladimir Putin. The article mentions that President Putin dismissed Roman Starovoit as transport minister and that Vladimir Putin hopes that Andrei Nikitin will succeed as transport minister. Nothing here about what happened later. And only this tiny column in the bottom corner of the page mentions that Roman Starovoit died. It quotes investigators saying they believe it was suicide. Moving on to other stories, we've been talking a lot recently about Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin and the rehabilitation of Stalin in Russian society. Well, this writer is worried about that in Moskovsky Komsomolets. There are more and more books, films and history textbooks portraying Stalin in a positive light. Condoning Stalin means rehabilitating Stalin's methods and practices. That is the inexorable logic. And from there, it's one step to their return to everyday political life. Finally, today in Russia, it is the Day of Family, Love and Fidelity. Officially, Russia began celebrating the Day of Family, Love and Fidelity in 2008. Since then, Russians are marrying less and divorcing more.